In the first quarter of 2026, according to reported figures, China committed 3.2 billion yuan to quantum computing in a single quarter, more than it had spent on quantum across the entire previous year. No routine budget cycle produces a number like that. Something structural changed. Before you file this under China chasing the next shiny frontier, notice the specific language the policy documents used. Not research priority, not emerging technology, industrial imperative. That phrase does not appear in prestige projects. It appears in documents where someone is accountable for delivery. The chip export controls were built on one core assumption: cap the silicon, cap the compute, restrict access to the most advanced processors, the ones Nvidia makes at the cutting edge of what any fab can produce, and you throttle the artificial intelligence ambitions that depend on them. Restrict the lithography machines that only one Dutch company in the world can build, and you prevent anyone from closing the gap domestically. The logic is clean. The assumption is that there is one lane, and the toll booth covers it. This story is about what happens when a second lane exists that the embargo was never written to cover. By the end, you will understand why the surge happened now, why catch-up logic alone does not explain it, and what the spending actually tells us about how export controls are being read in Beijing. 3 questions. Each answer lands harder than the one before. Start with the first one. What changed between 2025 and early 2026? The answer is not inside the quantum program. It is in what was happening to the other lane. The United States Bureau of Industry and Security restrictions on advanced chips, the ones targeting the processors Nvidia produces at the frontier, the class of chip the H100 and A100 represent, are publicly documented. So are the restrictions on the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that only the Dutch company ASML produces. Together, these rules form a toll booth built directly across the main highway of modern computing. The architecture of that restriction assumes one paradigm: silicon, manufactured at leading nodes, assembled in specific supply chains. You control the fabs, you control the tools, you control the compute. Think of it that way: a toll booth engineered for one road. It collects a real toll, but it was designed before anyone mapped the alternate route. Can China simply work around the ban, using older chip generations built domestically? Partially. Chips manufactured on mature process nodes, the generations well behind the current frontier, can power cars, sensors, and consumer electronics. They cannot run frontier artificial intelligence training at scale. That gap is real, it is documented, and it is not closing fast. The question is what fills it. Which brings you to what quantum computing actually is, and what it is not yet. A classical chip is stamped out like a coin. Billions of transistors etched onto a single wafer using machines so precise their tolerances are measured in atoms, in fabs, that require tools only a handful of companies on Earth can supply. That is exactly what the export controls were built to govern. A quantum processor is a different object entirely. Each one is closer to a precision scientific instrument than a manufactured component. It operates near absolute zero, cooled by dilution refrigerators to temperatures colder than deep space, running on quantum mechanical effects that the coin stamping rulebook was never written to address. As far as the public record shows, no equivalent export control framework has been applied to quantum hardware. Dilution refrigerators, superconducting qubit systems, the control electronics that run them, at anything like the scale of the classical chip restrictions. That gap in the rulebook is not secret. It is structural, and it is precisely what makes quantum the open lane right now. The policy documents trace the 3.2 billion yuan investment directly to domestic quantum research programs. China's leading quantum hardware company, Origin Quantum, sits inside that pipeline. IBM's publicly documented quantum roadmap, with processor generations including Eagle and Heron, represents the Western benchmark this race is measured against. Chinese programs have announced claimed milestones in qubit development, though independently verified system-scale benchmarks are not available in the public record. What is documented is the policy chain, a directive framed as an industrial imperative, flowing into qubit labs with delivery accountability attached. That answers the first open question. The industrial imperative label was not rhetorical. It was a targeting document. Now here is the question you should actually be asking. If quantum computing is years away from doing anything useful, why pour money in now? Because the timing is the point. No utility-scale quantum computer exists anywhere in the world. Not at IBM, not at Google, not in China. Google's Sycamore processor generated significant attention in 2019 with a quantum advantage claim on a narrow, specifically constructed task, a claim that was published and then contested. It was not utility-scale computation, and no one in the field argues it was. Most estimates from researchers and analysts put genuinely useful quantum computation, the kind that would matter for artificial intelligence or cryptography or materials science at scale, somewhere in a range commonly cited as 10 to 20 years out. That is an analyst estimate, not a confirmed timeline, and the range is wide for a reason. So the hedge is not a bet that quantum arrives tomorrow. It is a bet that clearing the route now costs less than trying to enter after a paradigm transition, if one comes. If you know the main highway is permanently tolled, you do not wait until the alternate road is finished before you start grading it. You begin when the land is still cheap, and nobody else has claimed the route. A country whose classical compute is throttled by design has a structurally different reason to fund quantum than a country that is not throttled. The embargo created an incentive that did not exist at the same magnitude for any unconstrained actor. That is not a narrative. It is portfolio logic under constraint. Now for the honest accounting, because several things in this picture are less clean than the strategic logic makes them sound. The 3.2 billion yuan figure is a reported government and policy figure. It has not been independently audited. The strategic argument holds qualitatively, even if the precise number shifts, but it should be treated as reported, not confirmed. Chinese quantum milestone figures, qubit counts, fidelity numbers, are largely company-reported without peer-reviewed independent replication at system scale. Dilution refrigerators, the cooling systems quantum processors depend on, source some components from Western vendors, including firms like Oxford Instruments. Whether those components currently face coordinated export restrictions is not clear from the public record. And quantum error correction, the unsolved engineering problem that sits between a research qubit and a computation you would actually trust, remains unsolved at scale everywhere in the world, not just in China. The hedge could burn before it pays. That is a real risk, not a rhetorical one. Set the uncertainty aside and look at the shape of what just happened. Every time a major restriction closes one compute lane, it creates structural incentive to fund alternatives that were not worth the risk before. That pattern is not unique to this moment or this country. It is how paradigm transitions get funded under constraint. Here is my honest read. The triumphalist version, China has already end-run the sanctions, overstates a technology that is not useful yet and may not be for a decade or more. The dismissive version, this is prestige spending that will not change anything, ignores that a hedge of this size, framed as an industrial imperative, executed at this speed, is a structurally new variable that the export control architecture was not designed to absorb. My read is this: the embargo was designed to cap classical compute. It may have accidentally accelerated the timeline for the paradigm it was never written to govern. That is not a win for either side. It is a new variable neither side fully controls. Here is my honest question for you. Does a quantum hedge this large actually change the strategic math? Or does it only matter if quantum arrives before the classical compute gap becomes permanent? Both sides are defensible. I want your real read on which one holds and why. Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to follow this specific story as it develops. Whether the qubit labs deliver, whether the hardware supply chain gets restricted next, and whether the classical gap hardens or closes first. The road was blocked. Now you know which lane they are betting on.